This is the day that we're going to talk with Lorne Morrow about forestry. Lorne has been involved in forestry for many years. He's moved away, but he's made a trip back today just to do an interview with us. And again, it is February 2024. So this is a few years ago for Lorne, but hopefully your memory's good there, Lorne, on some of the things that have to do with forestry in this area.
Sure. Well, I arrived in '77. I graduated from forestry school in '77. I had an option to go on fire crew or do a Master's of Forestry at Lakehead. And I chose the Master's of Forestry, and I worked under George Merrick, who, if you recall, was a Czechoslovakian forester, well respected throughout the industry. And I worked for George, and what I was doing was I fertilized stands of trees. I had 60 stands that every 2 weeks I took needle samples from, and then I could tell how the tree responded by the way the needles changed. So every 2 weeks I'd take these needles, and I had a place up in Beardmore. In the old Woodlands building in Beardmore, right. I had two girls working with me. They would count out 1,000 needles from each sample, and then we'd do nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and we did this every 2 weeks for 2 years. So George paid me 9 months of the year. I was making $30,000 a year as a graduate student in 1977. I mean, it was great. And then I had the opportunity to write what was called the Forest Management Agreement. And that's when all the tree planting and site preparation used to be done by the government. And then they transferred that to the industry. And so I wrote, when I worked for the ministry, the agreement that set down the terms and conditions of that transfer. And what the standards were going to be. So I wrote the FMA for the Domtar Lake Nipigon Forest, and then I got hired by Domtar to implement, which was pretty neat when you think back to it.
Right.
As I was thinking about it, I was going to take. I thought this was going on to be a full-time job, and I thought $1,500 a month would be as low as I'm going to go. And I worked for Bert Jarvis, if you remember Bert. Yeah. He kept every penny he owned. And I was in George Merrick's office when Bert phoned up George to see what I was getting paid at the ministry so he could set my salary. So George put his hand on the phone and says, "Lorne, what do you want to get paid at Domtar?" I said, "Try for $1,900. And I remember when I went to sign on, he offered $1,910. It's just typical Bert Jarvis. So those were the first years of where we were in charge of tree planting and site preparation and spraying, and it was all new. It was so much fun doing it.
So what area would have been the tree planting?
This would have been up around Beardmore and Jellicoe. And the first tree plant, we had unionized Domtar guys who were on layoff planting trees. So Bert tells me, if they don't plant 1,000 trees a day, fire them. So I'm right out of school, and after 5 days of planting, there's about 20 guys who aren't up to standard. So I fire them. So that night at Camp 75, which was the live-in camp, the war drums were beating, and the next morning they won't get on the bus. So it's 5:30 in the morning. I'm saying, "You don't get on the bus, I'll fire you too." So Bert comes flying out from town, mad as hell. Well, I didn't. I said, "You told me to fire them." He says, "Well, I didn't really mean it." But what it did, we hired them all back, and then they didn't want to plant trees, and they all sort of disappeared. It set a standard, and so I had a crew of Domtar planters, and I had a crew of women from Jellicoe, Geraldton. And so you know those snowstorms we get in May, those late storms. So it's a Monday morning, and there's about this much snow on the ground. How am I going to get these guys to work? So I went down to the women and said, "You know, these Domtar bushwhackers, they're tough. they'll plant today, so I get the women planting. Then I go down to the Domtar guys and said, well, if women can plant, why can't you plant today? And then at coffee break, they find out what happened. So and that's when, just as we were mechanizing the bush, and as the bush camps were shutting down. If you think about it, it used to be $1.75 a day room and board at camp. And that was etched in stone in contracts. It even had no substitute for butter in the contract. No substitute for fresh juice. And we had, at that point, just one camp left, Camp 75, which was just east of Beardmore.
Right.
And then we had Camp 56 was just closing at that point. And we had Camp 81 was starting, basically. And the reason that camp started, that was the last real camp we had, because that was the worst bush we had. It was all rocky country,
right,
and mostly local guys. I can think of some of the first crews were Pierre Pelche and Ray Dupuy, Scotty Tazy, Brian Hertz, Lyle Collins. You know, it was a pretty tough bunch we had.
Right.
And then I went from FMA, Forest Management Agreement Forester, to Chief Forester, and then I became logging superintendent, and I had the responsibility of basically shutting all these camps down.
Just one question, when you're talking about the tree planting, where did you get the trees from in those days?
Well, that's the fact. The government contracted out to the one in Hercot.
Right.
They funded those new nurseries to be built.
Okay.
So there was one in Hercot, there's one in Pass Lake, there's Hills Greenhouse in Thunder Bay. So that's when all those greenhouses began.
Okay.
When that transition from the Crown to the to Domtar, in our case.
Right.
And so then we evolved. That went quite smoothly, because when you think about it, it also meant that if you're cutting the stand, you're going to think a little bit about how what your cutting does in case you have to plant trees there. So if
right,
it really brought it married the two things as
right,
one. And then these camps began to shut down, one after the other. And we went from 3 camps to 2 camps to the Camp 75 at the end. We shut 75 down. We went to marshalling points at Beardmore, Geraldton, and Nipigon.
Right.
And then, if you recall, they shut the #1 newsprint machine down in Red Rock. Well, you didn't really need roundwood for linerboard. You'd basically use chips and sawdust. So that's when we made the decision to shut the woodlands down, and that wasn't much fun. And
that woodlands then was in Nipigon.
That was Beardmore.
Oh, that was Beardmore.
Geraldton, the whole works
Okay,
basically
all
went
of
down.
them.
That would have been about, I don't know, 1988, 89.
Okay.
And what we did is we replaced it with sawdust. We bought every ton of sawdust from the Manitoba border to Sault Ste. Marie up to Hearst. You know how many truckloads we'd buy in a week? 150, 160 truckloads of sawdust a week.
Transport for it.
Transport loads of sawdust.
Did you buy from the plywood mill?
No,
Okay.
because most of that was hardwood.
Okay.
You can't really, when you make paper with sawdust, just think about it. The fibers are shorter because so then it won't drain as well. So and then if you take a species like poplar, it won't drain properly.
Okay.
So then I lost my job and I went into the mill and I worked on shift. I didn't have a clue. I remember the first night I got called in. I was on call, and I got called in, and they said the rakes are broken in the white liquor clarifier. So I arrived at the gatehouse. I said, well, you better come and get me. I have no idea where the heck the white liquor clarifier is. So I go in there, and the guy's got his feet up on on the desk. I said, so, what's wrong? He said, the rakes are stuck. I said, well, what do you do? He said, you tell me now to bump the rakes, and then I bump the rakes. I said, well, bump the rakes. He says, okay, you can go home now. So, and it was this lack of autonomy that these men didn't have.
Wow.
And then the same night I get called down to the paper machines, and the guy says to me, should I wash up? Should I wash the machine up? And often you wash the machine up so you don't have breaks. I said, I've got 15 minutes experience, and you've got 30 years experience, and you're asking me, should you wash up? I think you can make that decision. But I loved working with men, and the woods guys were different than the mill guys. A woods guy will get under a belly pan of a D8 tractor at 20 below zero and drop the belly pan and think nothing of it. Mill guy wouldn't do that. No. But a mill guy will walk into a stock spill right up to his neck. And we were, and then from there, I got a call one night, because when you're on shift, as you know, you lose touch with the world because you get 4 on, 4 off, and you never are really there for weekends. I got a call one night to go work for Ken Buchanan in Thunder Bay. And I thought, okay. So we went to Thunder Bay. Linda, I told her, we're never coming back to Nipigon, Red Rock. So you can just quit your job. She should have taken a leave of absence, but she quit her job. I hadn't been up there 6 months. I get a call from the VP of Domtar. Want you to come back to the mill as assistant mill manager. I said, there's no such title. I said, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. So we couldn't meet in Nipigon because everybody would know what's going on, and we couldn't meet in Thunder Bay because Buchanan's people would know what's going on. We met at the Pass Lake truck stop. So we negotiated that, and that first summer was brutal. I didn't have a maintenance superintendent. I didn't have a paper machine superintendent. I didn't have I didn't have anything. But it was so much fun. The men were really good. They were just fantastic. I remember one day we didn't make any production. It was all stupid mistakes. The contractor hit a power line and somebody did this. And Don Whittle, the VP, who was a very dignified PhD, would phone me every morning. Well, Mr. Morrow, how much did you make on number 1 yesterday? Nothing. Well, how'd you do on number 2? Nothing. And my voice was quivering. And he says, don't you quit on me. Don't you quit on me. I think he's going to chew me out. And he was a wonderful, wonderful boss. And then we started to make some money, finally. And we had some good years. And then they sold out to Cascade, and we became Narampak, which was pretty good times.
By the way, did Linda get back to work?
Let me tell you that story. So she then had given up her seniority. We moved back to town, 3 kids in the apartment block in Red Rock.
So you better tell people what her job was before you left.
Well, I'm trying to, she was, at that point, she was in charge of co-op students, I think, and phys ed. Eh?
At the high school.
At the high school. And so she lost all of this seniority. And she was pretty down and out. I thought, so we fixed up our camp, and I thought that would to pick up her spirits. But within a year, she was back, cranked up, and at the end, she was the principal of high school at the end. So it all worked out, and it was a wonderful place to raise a family. But we were making pretty good money in 93, 94, 95. But the weakness of the Red Rock Mill is we depended completely on natural gas to dry the paper. We had no burners or anything. We just burned natural gas. And if you think back to when the announcement was made about the closure, natural gas was at $15 a BTU, which right now is about 3, so it's 5 times normal. It cost more to dry the paper than buy the fiber to make the paper.
My.
And every penny change in the dollar was $2.8 million off our bottom line. So what happened, if you recall, back in 2005, the dollar was at about 69.70 cents. So we're manufacturing in Canadian dollars and selling in American dollars, so we were quite profitable. But if you remember, that's when the dollar went up to $1.04.
Right.
And every penny shift on that took $3 million away. So we swung almost $100 million negative in a matter of about 4 months.
Wow.
And I was down at budgets with the Cascade people, and they're very different than the Domtar people in many ways. And I was getting heck about the ratio of maintenance material to maintenance labor. And I said, you're just sorting the deck chairs on the Titanic. And everybody dove under the table. He got mad. He took me outside, swore at me for a while and said, you're right. Am I shutting one machine or two? And they made that decision right there. And it was horrible. It was horrible because, yes, it's a business decision, but I live in the same town as these people, and I was raised in the town with these people.
Right.
So when you're walking in the grocery store and you've just been laid off, guess what? You're not very happy with me. And it does become personal.
Yeah.
It was hard. It was hard. And the men were superb at the end. I remember the last day, I did the calculation that the machine's going to run out of stock at 2 o'clock. And we had all the retirees in there, and it was sad.
Yeah.
And that machine wouldn't go down. It just kept running and kept running and kept running. And finally the red light went on and the tail came through. And we all took a picture with the last roll and walked out. And that was the end of it. And I never went back.
Oh, wow.
It was truly a market that took us out. All the Canadian mills, it wasn't right long after that. Everybody went down, bang, 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 bang,
Yeah.
because it was driven by currency and natural gas.
Yeah.
If we had survived, we'd be making really good money now. Because, hey, nobody shops anymore. You get it all in a box at your door. Guess who's making the box?
Yeah.
But I was surrounded by experienced, talented gentlemen. Gerald Saracen,
Right.
bright man.
Yeah.
Rodney Barr, Bill Scott, these are solid people.
Yeah.
I remember, Gerald was a big guy, and he had that same coat he wore all the time. And when the Cascade board came up to inspect us, so basically decide if we're going to stay or not, he said, "Who's that big guy?" I said, "That big guy is the best manager in this mill, and he's staying here as long as I'm here." They never bothered me again.
Oh, wow.
Because Gerald was he had basic grade 12, but a very, very smart man,
Yeah.
very, very talented man too.
Just saying that, though, we often talk, my boys and I will often talk that it's amazing that lots of them went as summer students and they stayed and they learned so much, and they were smart people. They didn't have to go on to college or anything.
No, exactly.
I always think some of them had initiative and they learned, but they were smart people that worked at the mill.
I got to tell you this story. So my first year in charge, we're meeting in the back room to hire students. And I said, well, how does this work? Well, she says, well, if you've been in the mill 14 years and he's been in the mill 13 years, we'll hire the kids of the 14 year in the first and then the 13 year. Then he said, hold it, but if Sally's sleeping with Bill, we add it up, and then they've got 18. We hire. I said, what?
Okay, stop right there for a minute. Okay, reset that.
So
that's an interesting way to hire this.
And I said, I've had enough of that. I went back to my office. I phoned the high school. I said, who's the smartest person in the school whose parents don't work at the mill? They said, Amy Ulamaki. I said, tell her she's got a job. So I hired her just to drive a point home that you're not entitled to a job. You earn the job. And I brought in interviews.
Yeah.
And years later, her practice, she's a dentist now.
Yeah.
Her practice is right beside my house, basically. So I walked in and said, tell the dentist Mr. Morrow's here for payback. And she walked out from the back room and said, yes, he gets the reduced rate because he paid for my education. Because a summer student would make oodles of money.
Yes.
Like there's $25 an hour, they get time and a half, so their schooling was paid for.
Yeah.
And we always hired most of it, but I did it just to drive a point home.
Right.
That you're not entitled to the job, you earn the job.
And I think that lots of kids didn't bother applying because they knew their parents didn't work there.
That's right.
And they used to think, oh, you're going to get a job because your dad's worked there for so many years. And that was a bad slide for students. To
and I didn't let my kids work there. So they had to work at the golf course. So I had to buy a beat-up old car so they could make $7 an hour at the golf course instead of. But it was the principle that I didn't want to show nepotism with my own kids, and so therefore, Jim Folds used to laugh at this because he said, "Yeah, Moore, we can't say much because your kids aren't in here."
Yeah.
And I did it just so it would have been a tough run for them in the mill too, because when your dad's the mill manager, like my son said, Dad, at most parties I could have been in a fight every night because you were the mill manager.
It's true.
It's true.
That's true.
It's true.
That's true.
But it was a wonderful place to raise a family. My youngest son Dave has Down syndrome, and when Dave was born, the truckers and I had 18 truckers. They wouldn't sign their contracts. Jimmy Thompson, Randy Dampier, that a whole bunch. I arrived back from Sick Kids and there was 18 signed contracts on my desk. That's the part that I loved about the guys. They're pretty practical, honest, hard-working guys.
Yeah.
And they knew that Morrow's got enough trouble this year. We'll fight him next year.
Right.
And, I had a new secretary in the woods at that point, and they'd park their trucks along the road and then come in and yell and scream about the roads. They're too rough and everything. And, every second word starts with an F.
Yeah.
And this girl, she said, "Are you all right in there?" I said, "Oh yeah, we're fine." We're fine. They yelled and screamed, and then they said, "Okay, Lorne, bye-bye. We'll see you Monday." And away they go. But and even at the end of the mill, the last week before we shut the mill down, they were meeting budget and production. I said to the guys, don't sabotage. And they didn't. Yeah. They went out with class. I said, go out with class. And I was talking to some guys last week who said they didn't get screwed on their pensions and settlements and stuff.
Right.
Whereas Marathon, where they all lost their pensions and that.
Right.
That was the one good thing about Cascade.
Right.
Which
is a concern right now for Terrace Bay.
Which is a huge concern
for Terrace Bay. Right.
We got replaced by a 330-inch recycled machine in New York. And it's just a recycle, it's just cardboard, you beat it up again and throw it back. So to put in perspective, our machines were 220-inch. So this is a massive, another 50% larger.
Wow.
130 men, and we had 500.
Wow.
So you can see how you couldn't compete against that.
Right.
You could not compete against it.
So just give us an overall, was it the availability? Why did all of the mills all go down within those few years, Lorne? Because Northwestern Ontario, let's face it, it was the place to live.
Sure it was.
A mill town was the place to live. Sure. And then gradually that has all changed. But there has to be
well, it got down to that period of time, our dollar was at parity. So we had to compete with mills around the world. And you're competing against Asia, and there was a set of mills built in China called the Nine Dragon Mills. And they were massive mills who would buy the recycled paper in North America, take it back to China, and ship it back to here's boxes. And those mills, and within a matter of about 5 years, they had 20% of the North American market share. But it certainly, it was a perfect storm of currency and natural gas costs and power costs all went at the same time. The fiber, I used to tell people, that labor costs do not drive a mill. People say, well, look at the money the guys make. Oh, they work hard. Yeah. They're working a 12-hour shift. and you know, they deserved to be well paid, and it didn't drive the cost of the mill.
Right.
I remember we had a breakdown, and we had to get a part, and I flew a jet down to Texas to get this part and come back, and the guys got mad. The union kicked up a storm, and I said, "Come on into the office, and I'll show you why we did that." And that was the one thing with Narampak Cascade. They wanted the men at the financials. They wanted the men to be. First thing they did was took the locks off my door and moved my office right to the fronts. And I had a secretary in front. They got rid of that. They wanted the men to walk right into my office. Right. And my computer got stolen twice. And then after that, it didn't. Because they're involved with the financials, and they realized this is what the costs are. Right. And so that was the one really good thing with Cascade is they wanted the men involved to understand the costs of the mill.
Right. Right.
Like when you pull that vacuum pump out and you change it out, it costs $60,000. We want the men, but it wasn't the labor cost that drove it.
No.
It was the world markets changing.
Right. So. Well, my boys often talk about what a change in the economy now from even when they were younger and they worked at the mill, and now it's a whole different ballgame now. The mill put
$96 million of goods and services into the two towns. $96 million. A snowflake wouldn't hit the road in Red Rock when the mill was running. That plow was out. Right. They were shoveling senior sidewalks when I first got there.
I remember those things. Yeah.
And you know that's just the world has caught up, and they've found techniques to make paper as strong as our great black spruce, which made the great paper.
Right.
They add stuff now, and but no, at first people thought, why did Red Rock go down? But immediately after, they went down. Just like 80% of the sawmills and paper mills closed in that period.
Yes. Yeah.
Fort Francis. What's left is Dryden.
Is Kapuskasing got
Kapuskasing is hanging on. Espanola just closed.
Right.
Terrace Bay, and you know, Terrace Bay is not just Terrace Bay. That's going to affect White River. That's going to affect Hornpain. It's going to affect Chapleau. It's going to affect Hearst, because they consumed a lot of fiber. So,
yes, they did. Yeah.
And I don't know what shape the mill is in. Because it went from KC when it was a strong company, and then Buchanan's after that, and so I just don't know.
Yeah.
But
it's a whole new ball game now.
Yeah, it's sad. It's sad. It was an era of I just enjoyed working with the men. I just thought they were honest, hard-working guys.
I think you had a reputation, if I'm not. Every once in a while, I'll hear a comment.
Oh yeah, because I was a straight shooter. The guys, but I got taught a lesson there. I had this old guy from down south who helped me the first summer. And he said, "Lorne, you just can't fire a guy in Red Rock." I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, I fire a guy in Mississauga, he walks down the street and gets a job. You fire a guy in Red Rock and his family's got to move." And I really enjoyed the relationship with the mill unions. They were really professional. They were really skilled. And they used to say, "Lorne, if you've got a problem with let's talk about it." And you know, I look back, and I would, where normally you might fire somebody for a bad offense, I had a guy who dumped rocks into the reclaim, which were plug-in digesters up, because he didn't get a day off. So normally you'd fire a guy for that because you've endangered your fellow employees. Right. I gave him 9 months off, and there wasn't a word said. But if I'd fired him, the union would have had to defend. Yeah. Yeah. And there was a relationship there that was solid. I mean, Jim Folds and I are friends, yet we battled for years. I could always tell him he was mad because the veins in his neck would start jumping like that. But he was when he would speak, people would listen.
Right.
He led the mill unions as long as I was there,
Right.
and he was fair.
Right.
If somebody deserved something, then I'll never forget when I was surrounded with women. I had Sandra in accounting and Beth Wills.
Right.
Beth was in the labor pool, and I saw how smart she was. So I put her in charge of testing the paper. And then she was so good, I put her in charge of all the customers. Then I made her production manager. Well, when I did that, the control rooms were full of Playboy posters and everything. And I said, I want them all down. Tear them all down. Well, I got grieved on it. The way that would work, a grievance, a first stage would be with the supervisor, and a second stage comes to me. Well, it came second stage to me. And I said to Reddy Lindquist, the union, I said, please push it to stage 3 because you're going to get clobbered in the court. He said, Lord, I had to bring it. I said, well, get rid of it because we're not going to have pinups when I've got women working in those areas. But that's sort of our story. You could equate that in Fort Francis. You could equate that at Abitibi. It's just the whole
Over and over again.
Over and over again. And if you look at the boxes you get now in the mail, they're crap. They're recycled paper. Did you know that you can only recycle a piece of cardboard 5 times?
I've heard that too.
Because you're breaking the fibers up. You're breaking the fiber till finally it's just mush.
Right.
And they needed our virgin paper to make the recycled paper, but they wouldn't pay us the extra dollars involved. When you figure you've got a recovery boiler, a pulp mill, a woodlands, as opposed to a big pulper that pulps up paper. So
Okay.
there you go.